Hi, this is Dr. Aaron Snyder. I'm one of the co-directors of the retreat program called Empowering the Heart of Healthcare, which we're holding at Shambhala Mountain Center in the Colorado Rockies, June 23rd through 30th of this year, 2017. I am here today to talk with Dr. Carole McKindley-Alvarez, who is one of the teachers of the program. Dr. McKindley-Alvarez is an expert in cultural humility and diversity and has been a change agent in her community, especially in social services and educational settings for the past 15 years. She's a professor of psychology at Contra Costa College of San Pablo and also at St. Mary's College of Moraga and at Argosy University of San Francisco. Carole has also been actively involved in her own Baptist community for the past 30 years, where she is a spiritual educator.
So welcome, Carole.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So Carole, as you well know, our program is essentially about how habits of mind and habits of how we work with emotions affects our lives, the quality of our lives, and especially of our professional lives as healthcare professionals. There's potentially a negative aspect to that, a very painful aspect to that. And there's also a very fulfilling and supportive, positive aspect to that. So let's start by talking about the positive aspect. Carole, how would you describe ways in which our mental habits and our emotional habits can enhance both our efficacy and our quality of life at work?
So it's a really good question because one, when you're in the service field, which is what I like to call it, versus the helping field, we're actually providing a service. Part of what makes us gravitate to being in the service field is the unique desire to be connected, relational, and support people in a journey of healing, whatever that journey looks like. And we do that by uniquely utilizing not just the knowledge that we have for doing the work that we do, but actually by what we naturally bring to the work, which is our gift of compassion, our gift of connectedness, our gift of caring. And so this work actually allows our humanity to blossom and to connect in a way that we rarely get in the larger society that typically pushes people to challenge or question humanity as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. So there's sort of a core issue that I have encountered many times in training healthcare people in this side of the work, and I'm sure you have too. And that is basically, if I care too much, it will destroy me. And it's a sticky wicket. Other people say, the patients that I enjoy taking care of are the ones I care about.
Yeah.
So should we be thinking about that kind of open-hearted connection as an asset or a liability, a threat or a tool?
Again, I like to look at it from the larger, what I like to call the systemic perspective. I think from birth on in our society, we're actually taught not to utilize our heart as a way of doing any kind of work. We live in a society that's very capitalistic, and that can lead to us being very non-heart oriented. Being in our heart and connecting with people on that level is actually an asset because it allows us to be very empathetic around what it is that a person is going through. And it's something to be said about empathy creating an avenue for people to feel seen,
Mm.
and seen in a way that what they're experiencing and the journey that they're traveling is something that people can feel, not just understand. So it's
Hmm.
beyond, I get it. It's, I feel what it is that you're trying to articulate to me, because typically words are, no matter how fabulous language can be, it can be so limiting because we can't always put to words the actual empathetic experience that we have. And so the heart is definitely an asset, though again we're taught from very early on that it's a liability. So when we are exposed to other people's pain and suffering, it causes us a great level of discomfort. And so typically, what we want to do is kind of run away from that discomfort because there's a real fear of being encompassed by it and then not being able to really pull yourself out of that. And we think of ourselves as those that are designed to be the service provider. So we have to be at a higher level, quote unquote, than the people that we're serving. When the reality is, no, it's not that you need to be at a higher level. You actually need to be interconnected at the same level. That is the power of the healing. And so we have to fight against seeing the heart as deficit based or as a liability, and seeing it as the key component to service delivery. Without it, we might as well just be robots doing the work.
Hmm.
And it's, time tested, true, that we know that the best service, the healing of whatever we do, comes from the heart,
Hmm.
heart to heart work. That's where the healing comes from, but that also is where the depth of the pain resides.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. That's a brave statement, and and we'll spend our week bringing people to some level of comfort and some level of inspiration
Yes.
with that statement. You're just putting it out there at the start, and that's the vision. That's spectacular. So I'd like to dip into the painful side some, and you've alluded to it
Mm-hmm.
and how it happens. And well, just to make a simple question, what is your understanding of the dynamics of burnout, the cause of burnout, the way it arises?
So we typically define burnout as emotional exhaustion. So that's deeper than physical exhaustion. I think sometimes we use physical symptomology to explain or understand what might be happening on a deeper psychological or emotional place.
Mm-hmm.
But burnout is really the emotional exhaustion. And so what causes that is not simply the exposure to pain and suffering, but it's the exposure. And what I personally believe is our attempt to block against the exposure. And so we're taught to believe that if you are exposed over and over again to people's pain, that that leads to exhaustion. It's not the exposure, it's the fact that as we hear it, we may unconsciously try to prevent ourselves from allowing it to seep in a way that really touches our spirit, or what I like to say is touches our soul, and that it's that actually causes us to be exhausted. We are putting what I like to say counterintuitive energy. So we, instead of us riding with the pain and being in there with it and in the struggle and in the connected piece of that, we use so much emotional energy to keep ourselves strong, to keep ourselves immune, to keep ourselves blocked away from that pain and suffering. And when you do that day in and day out, and day in and day out, it is, for me, the cause of burnout.
Thanks. So I'd like to ask a question. It's almost like a clinical example.
Okay.
Um, so we have uh, a doctor or a nurse or a psychotherapist. You can imagine whichever of those you like,
Okay.
who says, "I have been doing this work for 30 years and I am tired and I like certain parts of it, but these patients who are so difficult," and you can imagine your version of that too, because different people have different ones.
Absolutely.
"I don't deserve to take care of those patients, and I don't like them, and I don't want to take care of them, and I'm not going to take good care of them."
Yes.
And few people are that honest, but you know the feeling,
Yes.
probably in yourself and certainly in others. I'm sure in yourself too. We all have it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what do you say to that person?
So first of all, we know that the clinical term to that is usually termed compassion fatigue, that the
Yep.
provider has been doing this service for so long that they are exhausted caring. And one, it's important for us to understand that when you're doing this work, you are going to have experiences of both compassion fatigue, but also vicarious traumatization, that secondary trauma where you start to experience the symptoms of trauma that is not from you actually having been exposed to it, but from the stories that you've heard. And ongoing vicarious traumatization can also lead to this compassion fatigue, this exhausted caring. But the reality is that, again, if we are doing this work from a heart oriented place, it can be very challenging when we do not have the strategies necessary to consistently create healing and centeredness in ourselves. And so, what happens over time is that we exert so much care. And I heard someone one time say, we only have so much care in the bank.
Oh God.
And if you don't replenish it, then you run out. And that thought process leads us to believe that I have to be really strategic in how and where I use my care, right? And so I've decided that these people, they deserve my care, and these people, they don't need it. And I don't need to exert that energy. When the reality is that we have an abundance of compassion, but it gets circumvented by our inability at times to stay centered within ourselves and to understand the love that we have that's just uniquely embedded in who we are and how we connect to other people. And so, to that provider who's exhausted, first, I want to say, absolutely, you are. Absolutely, you are. The work that we do is exhausting, it's overwhelming, and it can put us in a place in which we start to question our own humanity and the larger society's humanity. And it puts us in a place where we get very dichotomous in our thinking, those people who deserve the care and those people who do not. It's a part of kind of the system process that happens. That is when we're taking outside of our body, outside of our spiritual being, outside of our centeredness, that we can get pulled in that way. When you really provide that care first to yourself, which for me is in my kind of spiritual journey, it's prayer. It's being connected to a higher power that allows me to be reminded that I'm not doing this journey solo, but this journey is also not just about Carole, that this journey is about the connectedness that I carry with each individual within inside the larger society, that then I start to think about, well, if I'm experiencing this inability, this lack of desire to care for certain people, that's probably saying something about how I feel about the care that I'm giving to myself.
Hmm.
And so I take it from who I cannot care for and I rewind that into how is it that I'm caring for Carole that then connects to my ability to provide that abundance of connectedness to other people. if that kind of makes sense in the way I'm trying to explain it. So it redirects it from those exhausting people to how awesome it is to be in a room and have an opportunity to serve people when their humanity is probably at its lowest. And I can be part of a conduit to support them in rising to their natural giftedness and their fullest potential by being used in the relationship that I can have with them through my own centeredness and my understanding of my role in being a care provider or a service provider. That's what fights against this compassion fatigue, this exhaustion with caring for particular types of people. Because when you do this work, we actually feel pretty bad when we start to blame the people who we're supposed to care for their pain and suffering. Unconsciously, that wears on our psyche, it wears on our heart, but it's partially a defense that we have to justify how we are not able to show up at our fullest potential because our fullest potential has been kind of stripped from us due to our lack of support around staying centered and caring for ourselves. I've kind of gone all around and back, but hopefully I answered your question.
You did answer the question very nicely. Um, and I would say with each question, you've covered different territory that works together very well. So I'm really happy with it. I have one more question I'd like to ask.
Okay.
Um, so something you said made me think about working with differences among people. You talked about how professionals can feel the responsibility to hold themselves as higher in a hierarchy. And of course, there is hierarchy in healthcare. People come, they're vulnerable. There's a responsibility to take care of that vulnerability. And while we're not talking about technical care right now, we do hold that, we bring that. It's their moment when we're with them, not ours. Right. And so that is a difference. At the same time, professional differences, educational differences, which are common because we're all overeducated in healthcare at least, and cultural differences create a situation that can distance us from the people we're taking care of. And if I understand what you're saying properly, that's not what we want. We don't want to be distanced from them. And I think maybe this same centeredness and open-heartedness and genuine human connection has to do with working with differences in our professional life as well. So could you tell me about that?
Well, I agree with you. I think one of the things that we have experienced, again, in our larger society is that we're taught that difference is equated to bad or wrong, versus difference is just that. It's a person's unique expression of who they are and the journey that they have been on since they've come into existence. And so one of the things that can be a challenge, though, is that likeness, you make assumptions. So you make assumptions about, what you can joke about, you make assumptions about what you probably like, what you tend to do, etc. And we forget that likeness excludes all the other aspects of each human that we're talking to, because we're only gravitating to what is similar. And we don't ever take an opportunity to truly, authentically get to know that person. Whereas difference, it forces us into an arena of uncertainty. And then when you happen to kind of live in situations in which people want you to be politically correct, which means there are things that you should and shouldn't say, that further kind of puts you into a situation in which you feel bound to not be authentically you. if we're authentically who we are, we fall over ourselves and we say things that is not intentional to be hurtful, but that still doesn't take away the impact. We may still be hurtful, but those are those growth moments. It's the moment where we can say, oh, I get it. Because we all come with privileges, things that, we benefit from, both things that we've earned and things that we have not earned. And we all come from areas in our lives where we don't have privileges, where we have disadvantages in our lives. And that's what makes us so uniquely gifted. And that's what makes us a key part of the larger society. So where I'm going with this is that part of this heart to heart work is that you don't get to be in the box. You don't get to look at one person and make assumptions about them. They don't get to look at you and make assumptions. And it doesn't dismiss what you bring to the table. If you are an academic and you have a knowledge, if you're a doctor, you have a knowledge, if whomever you are, you have these knowledges, this knowledge, that's great. It's not a diminishment of that knowledge, but it's an understanding that we all have knowledge that is equally as invaluable, and that we can be so educated that we lose sight of the authentic connected piece, and we don't see that we're missing that because we're just, well, I'm here to help.
Right.
And I did what I thought was best, but you missed me. So you may have given me the same treatment you gave someone else, but you didn't see me. And therefore that treatment that should have been successful was not successful because you were not treating me. You were treating the same dynamic that you treat everyone else, whatever that symptom is, whatever that issue is. Difference says, take a moment, see me, get to know me. And it doesn't mean you have to do a whole clinical interview or have a whole in-depth conversation. It can simply be, what do you like? Or what's difficult about being here? What would you like to get out of this? It's simple questions that start you on just what I typically say to clinicians is I tend to say, have natural curiosity, and natural curiosity will create a relational dynamic that you will never forget. And that in itself is healing outside of any type of treatment you could provide a person. Natural curiosity that leads to relational connectedness that's all grounded, again, for me, in that open-heartedness.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, thank you. Are we missing anything that you think should be in this interview particularly?
I don't think so. No. I just hope that what we walk away with is the work starts with us and where we are in our love and our compassion for ourselves, and that how we see ourselves and how we value ourselves, it's not just what has informed our life, but I like to see things as an ancestry experience. It's all of the things that we have been led to feel and to believe that we may not even know how it's impacted our lives. And how do we sit in that in a way that we can celebrate even some of the most difficult pain and utilize that in a way to truly connect with the people that we're serving. And keep ourselves healthy in that process. That's it.
Is that all?
That's all.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
You're welcome.
Carole, Dr. Carole McKindley-Alvarez. So we, Carole and I, and Melissa Moore and Leslie Booker will be convening our retreat at Shambhala Mountain Center on the 23rd of June. You can find details about the program at the Shambhala Mountain Center website. And we will see you there.